So last week was very interesting idea, because what it did was, if I recall correctly, what we did was we put the world into a very different perspective, at least for the hour that we were together. And what we did was we looked at the world not for what the physical world is, but for what its makeup is, what lies beyond the surface of our visual experience of reality. And I started by pointing out that nothing in this room is what it looks like. What we're looking at is what the brain is interpreting, but really really things are existing in a wonderfully chaotic state on an atomic and subatomic level, and things are far more complex than the simplicity of solids and liquids. There's so much more going on. But the brain doesn't register that, or chooses to not register that in a conscious way. And based on that, we were able to launch into a very different discussion, which is the same from the point of the analogy, which is that this world is actually a makeup of both positive and negative. And we spoke about the existence of humanity, and the existence of the person is about bringing connection and consciousness. And we spoke about how we achieve this consciousness through consumption, through interaction, through integration, whatever it is, whether it be food, whether it be friendship, whether it be care for the environment, whether it be passive existence. These are all different ways of shifting the consciousness of the things that don't actively think. And the good example of that was that water has no consciousness, but when you drink water, its soul becomes a part of you, and suddenly it moves into a position of your consciousness. And with that, the water has now become aware of something that it didn't hold before. So when we do that, we are, the cliche term is, we're elevating. We're elevating the energies of the world, the thing that exists as a current through everything, and we do that through our intention within an action. We then concluded that the whole goal of humanity is to reach a point of consistent living like that, where the whole point of, what we should be working towards in life is living with an intention and an awareness in every moment of A, everything has a spiritual energy and exists because it is wanted within the universe. B, I have the ability to live a hedonistic life or an altruistic life. I can choose to see everything as a source of consumption and joy, or I can see everything as a point of connection. And C, I don't know what else there was, but that's the general gist of what we spoke about last week. Am I wrong? Have I spoken about something that I didn't teach here? I'm quite sure that's what we covered. Yeah, good. Okay. So this week, let's reframe. Let's recap, I should say. What we're doing is we're having a discussion around that big question of responding to, how do we respond to crisis? In the first week, and the second week, we spoke about the importance of not answering these questions until we're ready, of not proposing something until we're ready to deal with it. So today I gave a lecture about good things happening to bad people. If someone ever asks you, why do bad things happen to good people, the correct answer is, I don't know. And if anyone dares to answer something differently, they're either a fool or they lack empathy. You have to wait till they're saying, look, I don't know why it happens, but I'm curious to understand the deeper spiritual meaning of good and bad. Because then they're saying it's not a subjective thing, I'm looking to have an objective discussion. But when someone asks you, why do bad things happen? It's a subjective question, and it's not one in which you meant to go looking for an answer, it's one in which you meant to connect with the person who's asking. So that was very much what we spoke about in the first week, but we did it slightly differently. So what I want to do this week is build on last week. So we live in a world that is actually a makeup of good and negative. The definition of good is connection, and the definition of negative is disconnect. So when two people have a fight, that's bad. Why? Because they become disconnected. Why is love good? Because they become connected. When someone connects in a bad way, they're actually not connecting. They're building a stronger disconnect. So when someone uses someone else, they're actually building a disconnection. They're saying, I have no connection with you, which is why I can use you. In love, there's no usage. No one uses someone else in a state of love. You only use someone when you don't feel a connection to them. So abuse or misuse of another human is a form of disconnect. Abuse or misuse of food is a disconnect. I feel nothing for the animal, I feel nothing for the steak, I feel nothing for the carrot, I feel nothing for the fish, for the lettuce. It's just about my joy. It's complete disconnect, as opposed to, oh my gosh, this thing is dead, it's given its life, there's a soul in front of me, there's been a reincarnation, it's presented itself to me, in what way am I going to utilize it? That's building an empathetic relationship. It's not an unhealthy relationship. You're not meant to break down in tears when you see a steak, but you are meant to say, wow, this source of protein is about to sustain me in a way that I can't sustain myself without it. So we're building this appreciation. From the appreciation, we then move into the spirituality. And from the spirituality, we begin ingesting the soul of the food. When we ingest the soul of the food, we move the soul into a state of existing with purpose. And when things start existing with purpose and connection, imagine what the world's going to be like. Imagine when societies do that for each other. Imagine when families do that for each other. Imagine when humanity does that for the ecosystem. What sort of world are we going to live in? You would say, like, is that a spiritual idea, or are you just weaving that in? So I say, is it a not spiritual idea? Where does spirituality begin and global activism begin? Like, why let the two be symbiotic? In fact, they should be one, but not one without the other. So this week we want to talk about the human. We want to go back to us, because there was another very important point in the first week, was about response. That this isn't a series on why. We're not discussing why bad things happen. We're discussing what bad is, but not why bad things happen. And the reason why I said that, it's very important that we go back here, because this is what we're coming back to tonight, is because if you spend time looking for the why, A, you're not going to find it. Remember I said that. B, you're going to end up with the wrong answer. And C, you're going to do yourself a lot more damage in the search for the why instead of dealing with the what. Which is why if someone goes searching for a why for 5 years, they usually will not be a very productive human being. This idea of going and traveling, searching for the why, and at what point does the family benefit? At what point does the community benefit? In what way does the world benefit? So fine, you're looking for a why. You're eating the earth. You're eating the animals. But at what point is this giving back? So anyone that says I'm giving back by giving good vibes, give them your good vibes and tell them to start manifesting their vibes, because this world doesn't live on good vibes. No one ever fed a child with good vibe. Good vibe is good motivation, but it's not an outcome. It's not a finished. It's not an end product. That is why Jewish spirituality is so easily manipulated into an academic experience, because what it's working towards is action. Judaism is a very action-based religion. Action and deliberate inaction. However, once you leave all the action behind and you just stay with the spirituality, you get lost in that and you start losing the purpose of it. And when you lose the purpose of it, you can become, like in any religion, you can become a great sage, and you can become the most obnoxious person while you're doing it. Why? Because you've become a collector of knowledge. You are now great. There's a famous story with the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, where he was asked by his students, what's the difference between mysticism and philosophy? Both of them are explorations for the truth and trying to understand the deeper meaning. And he said it's quite simple. The more philosophy you study, the greater you become. The more mysticism you study, the smaller you become. And he said that's the difference, and that's why we don't study philosophy as much as we study mysticism. You'll get to an answer, but your relationship with the answer and who you are as a human will be very, very different. Instead of feeling like, I've mastered the knowledge and becoming an egocentric individual, you become the master. You become the master of nothing in the realization of how small this world is in context of what is infinite. And so it's an interesting idea. So we're not going to go searching for the why. That's what I said in the first class. Tonight we go back to the problem. What do I do? What do I do in a time of crisis? So last week was all about the world being good and bad, and what the purpose is, the purpose of connecting. So now let's come back to the crisis. So you're in a crisis. Something isn't going right. Things are more than just, we're not talking about you having a bad day. We're talking about you having a bad passage in life. Because a bad day, you can always have a whiskey, you can always go to bed, you can turn on the TV. These things, you can meditate. No worries. Bad day is easily solved. Doesn't mean it's not a bad day, but one bad day is easily solved. A bad period doesn't end like that. You don't go through a month of hell and go, oh, if I just spend a night watching TV, I'll be able to clear the mind. You can't have a bad month and go, oh, I'll do an hour meditation, I'll be all better. You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't say, oh, I'll drink a bottle of whiskey. You can't do these things. They're unhealthy sometimes, or they're too short. Meditation is a beautiful thing, but you know what happens if you meditate once and you never meditate again? Nothing. Wears off. It's like playing with a rubber band and then leaving it for 10 years. It will become brittle. So you once stretched it. Yeah, but the stretching has worn off. Same with meditation, same with exercise, same with eating. Imagine you say, like, oh, I don't need to eat. Why? I ate a lot last week. It never worked. Such a thing never worked for anyone. You don't go, oh, last night I was at a wedding. I ate like a pig, so today I can't eat. It's not a healthy lifestyle. You end up becoming hypoglycemic 8 hours later. It's like, if it's a weight loss thing, fine. Yes, you're going to do a great job starving yourself. You'll lose weight. But in context of energy and being a productive human being, it doesn't work like that. It only works through an ongoing thing. So if you have ongoing, is a great response to ongoing. So if you have a bad passage of time, a crisis, if you will, a divorce, which takes a long time, a teenage child takes a long time. These things are all challenges at different points for different people. So what do we do? So what we do is we start listening to the voices in our heads. And there'll be two voices that don't really talk very loud, but you will always be able to hear them. And the reason why they don't talk loud is because they're not talking to you. They are you. Voices that talk loud are not you. If you're ever having an argument with someone and they start yelling, it's because they're not you. When you're talking to yourself, you don't need to yell. You can whisper. You hear it. You understand it. You can speak half syllables. You get it. When someone's talking to you, they've got to use whole words, loud words, tones. The louder it is, the more distant it is. The quieter it is, the more real it is, the more you. Same with pleasure. The more soulful the pleasure, the quieter the pleasure has to be. The louder the pleasure, the more extravagant the pleasure is, the more shallow the pleasure is. So you can have a nice big meal, and it's a good meal. Or you can sit there listening to if you're a musician, you listen to a single note. It's like, oh, wow, they played the note, the harp, they played the string. It took me away. And then there's love. You don't speak when you're in love. You don't speak. You're just together. You know, the kiss is such a quiet thing. A kiss is quiet. There's no exchange. There's very little movement. And yet it's so rich. You can never say that a deep kiss between lovers is equal to an incredible meal. Both are pleasurable, but they're not the same. A meal is loud. It's big. It's very much outside, and it requires a lot of effort. The kiss is quiet and it's small, and yet it's far more profound. So you're going through the challenge. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? So we were talking about the voices. So one voice is going to say, fight it, explore it, run away from it. It's dealing with the challenge by being defined by the challenge. So why, I said in the first week, we like to search for the why. Because when we search for the why, we feel, or we hope that if we know the why, we can begin to contextualize. And if we can contextualize, we can put it in a box. And if we can put it in a box, we get it. And if we get it, we win. You never get bothered by the things that you get. No one ever goes, I'm so upset. Why? Because there's something in my control that I'm just not acting on. If it's in your control, you act on it. You only get bothered by there's something that's not in my control. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. It's not in your control. I don't know how that person's going to respond. It's not in your control. I've done everything I can, but now I'm waiting. It's not in your control. But you never go, oh, I signed the documents. The house is mine. I'm very frustrated. Why? Oh, because I've got control of the situation. No one ever gets upset when they've got control. So when we start searching for a why, we're trying to put control onto something that we may not be able to. So spending 10 years exploring for a why is not necessarily a wise thing to do. Not unless there is something very important that must be learnt. Then you go exploring the why. But you don't jump off a cliff searching for a why. You don't leave your life searching for the why. There is no lesson that is so important that you give up on life. I'm sorry. I need to go traveling for the next 50 years to find the why. That why doesn't exist, at least not in our tradition. If you have to go somewhere to find the why, you can find it inside. You sometimes have to take a break. You sometimes have to spend time abroad with a teacher or something like that. But to run away to find the why is not what we're talking about. So if you don't have the choice of why, what else do you have? You have the most painful choice, not exploring the why. Why is this happening? What do you mean? Do something about it? So you know that feeling of when you know you should do something, but you just don't want to? Because you don't want to start acting on the challenge, because that's, once you're on that path, you've got to carry on. You almost feel more comfortable sitting back and going, I don't want to do anything about it, because at least then I've got the option. You know what I'm talking about? I think everyone knows. Not talking about them. They don't count for this discussion. No, only because that is a much bigger. No, the truth is, if we had to be absolutely academic, of course they're a part of this discussion. Because, and I can say this because coming from 4 parts Holocaust survivor, I'll say fine. There are 2 types of Holocaust survivors. My grandmother used to always talk about 2 types of Holocaust survivors. There were the Holocaust survivors that get celebrated, and then there are the Holocaust survivors that faded away. The ones that get celebrated got married, they had children, they became grandparents, etc. Then there are the Holocaust survivors that died, and who got married, they lived in mental institutions, and they were gone by the mid-60s. We don't hear about them because why should we? They're not our grandparents. So we have a definition of survivor as being a very, very interesting, strong character. But my grandmother used to always talk about, when she lived in Sydney, she used to say every Pesach, I used to do this quite frequently, so my grandmother would walk into a particular mental institution in Sydney, and she'd say to the head nurse, who back then, they were like, the nurses had a lot of power, she'd say, I'm taking the Jews out. And the woman would say, no, you're not. And she'd say, yeah, I'm here to take them. There's a Jewish festival. You're not providing for them. I'm taking them out. And she'd have this wrestling match every year. And every year, my mother says, every year, they'd have a whole lot of very, very disturbed people at their Pesach table. They had people who would hallucinate, people that were seeing things, people that were experiencing things. And these were survivors that ended up in Sydney with no family, no one to care for them. And they weren't these resilient, strong people who had a mental wherewithal to raise a family. They were very, very fragile people that got lost. The world in Sydney and in Melbourne in the 1950s wasn't the same as it was today. The reverence for the Holocaust was a very different sort of reverence to what it is today. And therefore the care was very different, because there was a whole other side in Holocaust survival, which was just get on with it. My grandparents were all just get on with it sorts. They got married, love, no love, who knows.
The ones who died,
But
how did they cope?
the ones who died,
The ones who died, and how did they cope? Say they were in a stressful situation for months.
yeah,
What was their strategy?
I don't know, they're dead.
Oh, okay, so it's
We're not talking about people who die. We're talking. This series is about people who have to live, and so as living, you have to respond. When you die, you don't respond. Viktor Frankl, yeah, Man's Search for Meaning, correct. But the reason why I don't want to talk about the Holocaust in particular is because the Holocaust is very emotive. It's very emotive, and it's very raw, and it's very real for many of us. And it's very hard to have a discussion when we're talking about crisis as a Holocaust. Holocaust is like, that's a crisis on steroids. I'm just talking about life here in the 21st century in a Western country, which could happen again. But I'm just talking about living life in Australia and the sort of challenges that any of us would be experiencing. That's why I'm parking that to the side. But you'll see what we're saying. If you want to stretch it academically, I'm happy to stand by it, because the particular thoughts that we're going to share tonight, the mystics that wrote about it didn't differentiate. They themselves went through challenge, so they don't differentiate between. They went through oppression in Spain, oppression in Portugal, oppression in parts of Germany. So they, to them, this is all the same. So there's the voice in their head that says, go search why it's happening, don't do anything. And that voice has a lot to gain from you doing that. It gains a lot from you living a life which is tied up with whatever negativity is going on in life. Because when you're tied up with it, it's very hard to be objective, to see beyond it. It's very hard to see blue skies when things are very grey in one's own life. It's very hard to see green grass when there's a lot of negativity in one's life. And when that happens, we become an island unto ourselves, disconnected from everything else around us. Now, remember, this isn't right or wrong. That's not what we're doing tonight. What we're talking about is in context of last week. If the purpose of existence is to connect, then through succumbing, that's a negative word, through being a part of the negative ongoing issue in one's life, one cannot integrate into the spiritual purpose of existence. The other option is the harder option, to do something. Not necessarily to respond to it, it's to do something. So what sort of doing am I talking about? So I'll give you a classic example. You know when you're feeling down and you know that if you go for a walk, you're going to feel better, but you don't go for the walk because you don't want to feel better, or for whatever, you can't be bothered getting off the couch, or you can't imagine feeling better, so you don't believe it could actually work. You know when your friend has said, we're going for a walk, or you should go for a swim, or you should have a shower, or you should maybe sit and meditate, or perhaps you should do half an hour of yoga. There's that. Then there's or what about this? You know, you're in a bit of a bad way, and so the brain can move on to comfort zones. So we start eating comfort foods, chocolate, sweet foods traditionally. Less common is savory. Most people have a sweet comfort food. So it's 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, or it's the middle of the day. Does make a difference. You're hungry. And the brain says, comfort food time. So you know that if you eat this junk, it's going to perpetuate the mood. So you're going to pick yourself up and drop it. The sugar's going to do that, or whatever food is in this processed food is going to do that. So you got this little voice in your head that says, opening that packet of cold cuts or dipping that carrot into the hummus, that's probably going to be better for you right now. And the other voice is going to say, really? Carrots and hummus? Do you know how bad I feel right now? and that's what you're telling me to eat? And yes, I should, because if I get that nutrition going inside, I may actually feel better. I won't be as hypoglycemic. I could feel better. Or then there's the voice that says, go to bed. You haven't slept properly for 4 nights. You're tired. Go to bed. You're like, no, I want to watch TV. I want to absorb as much blue light as possible just right now. And because that's going to help distract my mind. When I'm in bed, I always have to think about it. So we go through these things. I'm not talking about like going on deep mystical trips. I'm talking about doing, and we don't do these things. And I'm quite comfortable saying we, because I know everyone in this room is a human just like me. I'd hate to think I'm the only one in this room who's weak. So I'm forcing you all to be weak with me. But I'm also presuming from the smiles that I'm getting that we're kind of all on the same page. We're all seeking this together. So when I'm talking about responding, I'm not talking about like go see a lawyer, go see a doctor, go do this, go do that. I'm just talking about now. We don't do it. And because we don't do it, get out of where we are, because we either want the whole thing to go away or we want to know why we're going through this. So how do you respond in crisis? You take baby steps that are going to put you in a better mental and physical position. Once you've got that, how did we get there though? You say, oh, hey, Kabbalah class, don't give me this stuff. If I want to go to a wellness lecture, I wouldn't have come here. Let's go back. The voices in the head. The voices in the head are not the tools of a psychologist. The voice in the head is very, very clear. One is the Yetzer Hara, one is the Yetzer Tov, the expression of the Nefesh Bahamis, the expression of the Nefesh Elokis, the animal, narcissistic soul, the self-centered soul, and the altruistic, high aware soul. And then you've got the Nefesh HaSichlis, the soul that resides completely in the mind and has no opinion. It has the ability to move you above yourself to observe. The Nefesh HaSichlis just observes, it just listens to what is at play. And then it will act on, it'll make a decision based on the two souls that are vying for the control of one's individual state of being. The Nefesh Bahamis is going to do whatever is going to be in the name of self-preservation and pleasure, and that will more often than not in this situation be negative, strangely enough, because it's not thinking about how to get you to preserve yourself, it's thinking about how you can be most enjoyable in this moment. And when the choice is to grumble on the couch or go for a walk, the more enjoyable option is to grumble on the couch. Otherwise, your animal soul would say, get off the couch. But the animal soul doesn't plan ahead. The Nefesh Bahamis is not designed for futuristic living. The animal soul is an animal. You never get a line that says, oh, winter's coming, might kill a few extra zebra, just for the next few weeks. We'll just keep those in the back of the cave. They eat, they're full, they walk away. They leave the carcass. There's no like, come guys, schlep it home. It's going to be a cold winter. A couple animals do this, but not because they're planning it. It's because that's what they do. That's what they do. So the crocodile eats or the snake eats and doesn't need to eat for another 6 months, but not because it's winter. We've evolved and we know what we're doing. Bears don't go right, tucking in for the 6 months now. They just do it. And that's because animals just do what they do in the now, what they need to do in order to feel better now, even if it is a disaster to them. So when the animal soul within, the Nefesh Bahamis within, has the choice of sit on the couch and wallow, or escape to the mountain, or go out for a walk, it will every time go to the mountain or stay on the couch. It will never tell you go for a walk, because there is nothing logical in going for the walk. It takes higher awareness of the situation to make a decision that you will only reap the benefit in 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 weeks' time. So the Nefesh Elokis is pushing to the Nefesh HaSichlis future planning. There is evidence. You've read the books on wellness. There is evidence. Go and do it. Nefesh Bahamis says, doesn't matter what the evidence says. Don't feel like doing it. Which is why Nefesh Bahamis, you don't beat yourself through reading books. You read books and then you store the knowledge so that when you are presented with the conflict, you say to yourself, as a human, because only a human can do this, you say to yourself, the truth is, I am mature enough to do whatever it is that I'm meant to do. So when we're in a crisis, let's now analyze this. We're not talking about a hangover. We're not talking about, so you're in a crisis. You either can choose to put one foot in front of the other, or you can choose to analyze why you're in the crisis. How has this come to happen? What does it say about reincarnation? Do I carry bad energy from a previous life? I mean, this whole Kabbalah class exists because we're searching for the whys, but that's okay. That's okay, as long as you're not searching for the why for the other 7 days of the week. As long as we spend only some amount of our time doing this, and the rest of the time, what should we be doing? We should be working. We should be sleeping, we should be eating, we should be trying to live as healthy a life as possible to set ourselves up. Why? Because the Torah says, that one needs to guard the soul. How does one guard the soul? Through physical lifestyle choices. For that, you can come to Spirit Grow during the rest of the week to understand what physical lifestyle choices are good and bad, etc. But let's just stay with this. So the Nefesh Elokis, Nefesh Bahamis are having a full-on fight. And I think we can relate to this. Sometimes you feel yourself oscillating between what to do next. Should I do this? Should I do that? Pick up the phone and say, should I do this? Should I do that? You feel yourself oscillating. You then have to remember this shiur and say, oscillation. I know what's going on here. I'm succumbing to immediate pleasure versus prolonging the pain for a short while to live a better life. So the response to crisis is do something. It's do something. But that's easily said. Easily said. It is the most sympathetic thing I could say to someone instead of empathetic. Do something. You can only do something if you build the higher awareness. The higher awareness of the nefesh hasichlis, governing the nefesh bahamis, the nefesh elikis, which employ the power of the Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Tov, the desire for what is good or the desire for what is negative. What is the desire of negativity? Separation. What is the desire of positivity? Collaboration, connection. So we've got to live with these things. Then we go back to last week and we say, okay, well, what is good? Good is connection. What do you mean connection? Connection is that there is a soul in everything. How do I build a connection with the soul in everything? Start thinking about it. Start thinking about that there's a soul in the other thing. The example I used was, think if you've got a spouse or a child, and if you've got a good relationship, this makes it easier. If you don't, it makes it harder. Let's talk about the people who have a good relationship with any loved one, a partner, a spouse, a child, a parent, whatever. Before you hug them next, just stop for 5 seconds. For 5 seconds. Stop and just close your eyes and just think, this person, let's say it's your spouse, because I'm thinking about my wife. So you stop and you think, this person is my soulmate. When one of us was born, the other one was destined to be born. And destiny brought us together, and now we're together. And I'm about to hold this person, who is the physical chariot, the Merkava, the one that carries the soul of my other half. And I'm going to wrap my arms around this person, and I'm going to love them. What's going to happen? Remember what I said? 1 + 1 = 3. What's going to happen is you're going to hug. Fine. One lover and another lover equals a hug. But the experience is what's not contained in that equation. What will the experience be? What will the experience be when you hug? It's not going to be a hug. It's going to be a trip. It'll last 5 seconds, 10 seconds, an hour. I don't know how long the hug will last. But that hug is going to be incredible. But how did you achieve that incredible? Intention. Preparation and intention. That's the connection we're talking about. So when we are in a difficult position, we have to go back and say, why am I in a difficult position? The reason why we're in a difficult position is because, maybe could we put it on silent? I don't know whose phone it is. That's okay. That why are we in a difficult position? We're in a difficult position because the negativity in the universe is challenging us. Why? I don't know. That's the big why. That's the one we really go seeking. What I'm talking about is not a real answer to why. Why is it going on? It's challenging us. It's challenging us. At this moment, there is a resistance force in the universe that is seeking for me to move into a state of self-absorption and separation from everything or anything else. Think about it. Every time you're in a difficult position, you're presented with a choice. Keep connecting or become insular. Now, if you become insular in order to climb out, that's not insular. But if it's become insular to remain insular, that's escape. That's not escape. That's removal. As in when you remove yourself from the world. If you remove yourself from a bad person, that's not removal. We're not tzaddikim here. We can't connect with everyone first up. You have to realize there are 3 tiers of people in your life, and you have to connect with all of them. The easy people, the not so easy people, and the hard people. But don't start with the hard people. You get nowhere. Imagine everything you do. Imagine if you're right-handed, I'm always going to write with my left hand. Don't pick battles like that and ruin the rest of your day. Be like, okay, I'm going to write with my right hand, but every day I'll dabble with my left hand. Don't work on things that are too hard. I'm not into that. We're not into that. Start with the low-hanging fruit, then move to the medium. Once you're mastering love, it's going to be a lot easier to master the love of the people that are challenging. But if someone is not in your natural love circle, if something is not in your natural connection circle, don't go suddenly chasing that and say, oh, that's my tikkun. Maybe it's your tikkun, maybe it's not your tikkun. Trust me, you'll have other hard opportunities with people that aren't so hard. It doesn't mean be negative, but doesn't mean it's fine. It didn't work. Move on to the next one. Move into the next state of connection. But don't move into the state of disconnection. The mitzvah is which means connection, is about engaging with what you can, not engaging with what you can't. And so that's the thought process. You're in a negative. You say, oh, this is a result of a negative energy that's looking for me to disconnect. I'm aware that I have the choice to disconnect, and it will feel good to disconnect and go searching for why it's happening, or just sit on the couch and not do, or I have the choice to keep taking another step. What is the biggest thing that it will cost you if you keep taking another step? Nothing. It'll cost you your patience, it'll cost you energy, it'll cost you, but it won't really cost you. So when we talk about Holocaust survivors for a sec, you've got Holocaust survivors that they didn't really know what was going to happen in 10 years from now, but they just figured, what the hell, I'm going to get married now. I'm going to bring a child into the world. I'm going to try to get a job. I'm just going to put on normal fitting clothes and see how that all works out for me. They were just taking one more step. They had no expectation to live another 30 years. They had no expectations of the world. They didn't want the world's compassion. But what they did do was take one more step. That's what I'm talking about. Did they not want to curl up into a ball? I'm sure they did. But did they? I'm sure some nights they did and other days not. But the people that we've turned into heroes as Holocaust survivors, ultimately what makes them heroes is that they went against the natural. And why do I say that? Because we see so many other societies in the world that go through trauma, and they do become disconnected from the society in which they live. And yes, they are traumatized, and I'm not blaming, but I'm just saying that there's the choice of taking one step. And the ability to do so is by having a higher awareness. Whether you nurture that or whether it's natural and therefore you fall back on it, I don't know. But I'm saying in the 21st century, 2016, 17, where we're at, where we're not oppressed with persecution, we need to nurture the awareness that when I'm in a crisis, I can take the step. What is the step? Enough to make me live today a little bit better. Be aware of the two nefashos and be aware of the purpose of why I exist. And the purpose of why we exist is not to find enlightenment. It's not to find the wisdom. That will happen, but it's not what we're reaching for. So we're not looking for the why. We're looking to live in a meaningful, connected way today. And that's how I'm finishing this series. It's not the answer anyone wanted. I'm quite sure of it. At least not when you walked in 3 weeks ago. What questions do we have? Yeah.
What advice would you give people who might be in a depressed state or an anxious state who may have less ability to...
Very good. Very good. So let's now talk about real life as opposed to textbook life. Real life as opposed to textbook. The textbook is go and take a step. But sometimes the situation has begun breaking us down. And to be human is to be broken down. Remember what that's a normal component of being a human, is that we get broken down. We get sick. What happens when you get sick? You get a virus. You get an infection. A part of the body that was once previously healthy and able to be a position of strength is no longer able to. So you need to deal with that. Sometimes you can deal with that overnight. There are certain antibiotics or certain medications that take 24 hours and boom. And then sometimes it takes a week, 6 months, however long a therapy. That's what a therapy is. Therapy is this ongoing experience in order to bring healing. Now, thank God, I always say this, thank God we live in the 21st century, where depression is no longer a bad mood. Anxiety is not just, you need to breathe more. These are real things. And because they are real things, they have real diagnoses. Because they have real diagnoses, they have real treatments. And so what you'll find common across all spiritual teachings is you rely on the Malach Raphael, on the angel Raphael. What is the angel Raphael? The Talmud says, you want to know where the angel Raphael is? Go to your doctor. That's where the angel Raphael is. A doctor's not a doctor. A doctor's a human being who's been gifted with a chush, with a talent, who's been gifted with a koyach, potential. And they have chosen to follow their talent and their potential and their interest to pursue the scientific studies of healing. So they go and they study from the schools of the healers, i.e. medical school, which is the educational arm of the healing seekers, of the people that go and research. And what are they researching? They're looking into the universe. They're looking into the world for what is it that will cure. They're saying, I acknowledge that I don't have it. I acknowledge that the cure is out there and that I have to go seek it. And I will open my mind to allow the flow of knowledge. I will look at that thing to notice the inspiration. There'll be a flower that will be a cure for something. Some kid has been walking past the flower every day and sniffing it and going, oh, what a beautiful flower. And yet they couldn't come up with a cure for cancer. But one day a doctor looks at it and goes, oh my God, I think I've got to look at that flower under the microscope. There might be a property that we haven't thought about. The bees that take the nectar from there seem so different, or whatever. So they look at it and they're so open to noticing something that, boom, the flow of which we call knowledge. What is knowledge? Where does knowledge come from? It's the Malach Raphael, which is the flow of the medical. So everyone wants to go have a mystical healing, go to a doctor. Now, of course, that calls into question medicine, ethics, doctors. So, of course, Malach Raphael doesn't just flow through anyone who's got a PhD. It doesn't just flow through anyone that's studied in university, but who is and who isn't. That's why we want the medical world to be an objective place. We want it to be an altruistic place. We don't want it to be driven by money or power, because then we're getting mixed things. We've got Malach Raphael being mixed with the negative of the universe. But let's just stick with objective, is doctors aren't looking to hurt anyone. Now, when I say doctor, it could be a Western doctor. It could be an Eastern doctor. Both are the exact same. They just have different methods to how they come to their conclusions. But they're seeking a truth and they're finding it. And if there is a precedent, which is what humans like, we like a bit of precedent, then you start saying, the precedent over here is a good one. It's worth the risk taking this bitter tablet because this person seems to have proven it in a lab. That's not to say that there isn't precedent in other systems, which is why complementary health has such an important role to play today, because as people are starting to be more willing to invest in as Mark Cohen says, Mark, who professor, he comes to the lectures here every year, and he says, the problem with my work is no one wants to invest in it. Why? Because when we come with the cure, everyone's going to stop making money. So who wants to invest in something that doesn't make money? That's the problem with preventive health. But he also says with a more altruistic generation coming up, people are investing in it for the sake of good. So we want to know, where's the spiritual source? The Malach Raphael, the angel Raphael is there. It's there. It's flowing. We have to stop looking at the world as there's the spiritual side and then there's the other side. There's no any. It's all spiritual and it's all other. It's all the same, depending on what your approach is. Depending on what the approach is. So when we come back to what you asked, what about depression? What about anxiety? Baruch Hashem, we now know what these things are. We now know that some people are more susceptible to it. We know that we are all prone to it. We know that the life that we live, so we can start taking the steps. So we don't fix ourselves today. We might fix ourselves we might get ourselves to back to even keel to start taking the steps. The first steps might be to get back to zero, and then we can grow from beyond. It's probably the best question that can be asked, because we always assume that no, that's not real. That's legit. What else?
Rabbi, you said previously, in a few other sessions, if I understood correctly, there's no reason or rhyme for why things happen. Is that what I got from?
If that's what you heard, it's comforting. But what I would have meant is that it is virtually impossible to find out why it's happening. But that doesn't mean there isn't a reason, which means I'll play semantics. When we say that there's no reason, it means that there is no There's no back end. It's just boom, spontaneous. When we say there is a reason but it's impossible to discover, it means there is a back end, but it's too complicated for the human mind.
So to take that further from what you were saying in the 3 sessions,
Yeah.
therefore, if you're looking for some meaning in life, I get the impression you find the meaning for what you term the higher awareness.
Yes.
And is that you talking about Hashem in a religious point of view, or
When I say,
within ourselves?
very good question. When I say higher awareness, what I mean is the ability to rise above our instinct. What is it? If I'm above my instinct, then I'm moving into meaning, because meaning is higher then. So meaning is something we have to adopt. So yes, ultimately I'm talking about Hashem, I'm talking about Torah, I'm talking about Jewish mysticism, I'm talking about the spirituality of understanding. And that is a very different thing, of where I'm not looking as to why this happened, I'm looking to understand the spiritual context of, if this happens, what is it that's expected of me? So we don't ignore a tragedy, we don't ignore a problem, but instead of looking at why is this happening to me, we move it into an academic discussion of why was this created and what am I meant to do within this context, which is really, if we think about it, that's really all we really discussed over this series. We discussed why negativity exists, as opposed to why am I going through the negative. So move it to an objective discussion instead of a subjective discussion. And that comes back to the awareness of something higher, which is, yes, Hashem and the spiritual system of understanding time, space.
So therefore, if you engulfed the higher spiritual system, as you're referring to, like Kabbalah,
Yeah.
I would think that possibly you may deal with the meaning of life in a more positive way.
Yes. Yes. And all it's seeking to do, all Jewish spirituality is seeking to do, is move a person not even to discover God. That can happen naturally, to discover the infinite. It's to discover, I don't like the English word. In Yiddish, it's Göttlichkeit. In English, it's godliness. I'm not here to find God. I'm here to find God in the tablecloth, the godliness, the spiritual meaning, not the source of the meaning. You'll find that, because we can't ever find the source, but we will reach the source through discovering the meaning. So correct. So all of Jewish spirituality is to put on, I always tell my students, I teach in a post-high school seminary, and every year I tell them that the Jewish spirituality is like, if you're short-sighted, it's like putting on glasses. The world looked one way, and now it looks another way, and nothing changed, and yet everything changed. And if you go like this, the world is a horrible place. People are fuzzy, it's a place of headaches, and suddenly the world is a very clear, beautiful space. And what the spirituality does is it moves you from, I don't know why I'm here, I don't know what I'm doing, and therefore I've got nothing to work with, to, wow. But now you've got the challenge of sight, but it's a very different challenge to the challenge of lack of sight.
So I also notice a similarity between the Eastern Buddhist religion of suffering is like an all part of life. And you're sort of saying also I sort of understand with Kabbalah, it's sort of a similar thing, but it's the way, as you say, the way you handle it or the way you react to it.
Yeah.
What happens to you as a...
So it's one of the, what's it called? The basic tenets of Buddhism, the 5...
Eightfold path. Is it
Eightfold Four Noble Truths.
The Noble Truths. Yeah. So the Noble Truths, so I think number 1 is we all suffer. I think that's the number 1. Look, number 1 means that's like top of the list. By the way, everyone just accept that. I haven't come across in Judaism that approach of we all suffer, because we look at suffering, I think, differently. It's similar in how we are responding to it. In that way, it's similar. What the difference is that suffering is, to begin with, a klippah. Klippah is a shell. So you've got an orange. In Reb Nachman of Breslov, I think he often used oranges as a metaphor. You've got an orange, and it's got this thick skin, and that thick skin doesn't taste nice at all. You have to peel it, and you get to the sweet, juicy fruit. So klippah throughout Kabbalah is the shell, and the shell is usually something that has nothing to do with the fruit, as in it's not about the shell, it's about the fruit. But the shell is part of the fruit because it's there. It protects the fruit to a degree. So but ultimately it's waste. But you have to move through it in order to get to the sweetness. We live in a world of choshech, of darkness. We live in a world of klippah. The klippah is the shell. So when we look at something that seems negative, we have to realize it's a shell of something that's far deeper, not necessarily in the thing as much as in our life. So we experience klippah all the time. We experience the shell of life all the time, but it's very important to move through it. There was once a student that came to Reb Nachman of Breslov, and he said, like, I have highs and I have lows, and I feel like I'm always hitting a brick wall. Like I go up and I go down. And Reb Nachman said, no, you're moving higher and higher. It goes, the outer layer of a level is bitter, and then you move into the sweet. As you get deeper, you're moving into the shell of the next level. So it gets dark. And he uses the example of the rind of the orange. It's all that white. It's like, you can't get through it. There's no color even. And then all of a sudden you're back at the fruit. And then you get deeper and again. So the suffering we experience is a shell. It's a covering of beauty. We don't see the beauty when we're suffering. I remember one of the last things I asked my grandmother before she died, her yahrzeit was 2 weeks ago. Last week was her first yahrzeit. And probably like a couple of weeks before she died, because she spent 3.5 years in Auschwitz. So I said, were there ever butterflies in Auschwitz? It was one of the things that I always wanted to know. And with her, you could ask anything. I just don't know why I never asked her this. I said, were there butterflies in Auschwitz? And she said, no. I said, were they not there because you didn't notice them? She goes, oh, no, they wouldn't have come there. The air was very bad in Auschwitz. There were no plants growing in Auschwitz. She said, maybe in the forests there were, but not in Auschwitz. There were no plants. So it was a very abrupt answer. But I was also trying to ask her, did you ever notice beauty? She said, not really. Too many mosquitoes, bad smells from the oven. But that's it. When we're in the negative, it's very hard to see the positive. So when the klippah is there, the suffering is our approach. But why it's very dangerous to say this, not dangerous, why it's callous to say this is because someone who's suffering will hear us say it. We're talking academically here, and say, oh, what you're saying, my problem is me. I don't approach it right. So we have to understand, not that we're born to suffer, that our nefesh bahamis has governance. That the egocentric, self-preserving and pleasure-seeking side of us always dominates. It's had 12 years on its co-soul. For the first 12 years of our life, we're pretty much animals. You'll notice kids are very selfish. They're cute, but they're very needy. And they expect parents to do things for them, especially when they're little kids, when they're like babies. I've spoken about this many, many times. Babies scream disproportionately to their hunger, disproportionate to the fact that everyone's sleeping. They couldn't care less. They don't even know to care. They're very self-oriented, but we put up with it because they're naive. When we get to teenagers, we don't want their naivety anymore. They get in trouble because they're expected to know better, but they've only had 2 years practice with higher awareness, which happens around 12, 13. So what we need to do is when we're suffering, we have to say, what is going on inside? What is my perception? And what am I going to do to shift? If I'm suffering, what am I going to do to change? And change might take 2 years. 3 years, might take 2-3 years. It's like I love meditation because it's such a good example. Anyone that meditates for a week doesn't see anything or sees very little. Goes, I tried it, my mind doesn't stop. I love the people who say meditation's not for me. Why? Because they don't realize they're talking to the guy who was expelled from school for being ADD. Don't tell me meditation's not for you. I know what the mind is capable of doing. I know how reckless the mind can get, and it's nonsense. It's nonsense. They say, why isn't it for you? I tried it, didn't work. You tried it and it didn't work. It's the same thing as what I said before. I ate last week. I don't know why I'm hungry now. Obviously, eating is a very, very silly, shallow thing because it only lasts 5 hours. Our perspective is wrong, and it takes a lifetime to shift perspective.
It's interesting you say that because there's a very popular documentary that came out not so long ago called The Connection, done by an ABC journalist.
Aussie?
Aussie ABC Channel 2. And she shows the scientific evidence between sort of improving your health, both physical and psychological, via meditation. And she goes to the sources of the scientists who prove it.
That's awesome.
Introducing, as you all this in schools,
Yeah. This is massive now. It's. I think it's an awesome thing that suddenly religious practice has been put under the microscope, and elements are being shown for their benefits.
Was meditation a religious practice of Kabbalists?
In Judaism, prayer is meditation. If you open the Siddur, it's one long guided meditation. We often look at the Siddur as jibber jabber, but it's a very, very carefully structured, which is why it should take. It says in the Talmud, it says before a person would pray, people would wait an hour. It's called shahiyah. Shahiyah is the practice of sitting still and not thinking about anything. Then you begin to pray. Then you begin to look at structured words and letters and shapes, and each word and each shape and each sentence gives you a thing to think about. And if you look at the simple structure of prayer, it goes me, the ability to sacrifice the self, the ego, to nature, to the inspiration of nature, to the source of nature, to the source, to the oneness, to the channeling of the oneness, to the obstruction of being, to being an obstruction to the flow, to moving out of the state into and moving into work. And then in the middle of the day, you go being the channel of the flow, not being an obstruction to the flow, and you carry on with your day. Then you finish the day with the oneness of everything, being a channel of the flow, and good night. Wake up, focus on me. The sacrifice, the ability to perform self-sacrifice, not to kill oneself, to go against one's tendency, to nature, to the miracle of nature, to the spirit of nature, to the spirit dropping nature, to the oneness of everything. And that's the structure. Somehow we ended up with choirs and catchy songs and lots of Hebrew grumbling. That I don't know when it happened in the last 500 years. But once upon a time, it was a very carefully crafted meditation. So yes, yes is the short answer to your question.
I just wanted to clarify the answer for the first question about the anxiety and
Yeah.
depression. Were you trying to say that we should, if someone is experiencing anxiety and depression, they should go straight to the doctor, or just in general find a healer?
They should go to a position of healing. Yeah. So it could be medication, it could be meditation. Meditation is medication. As in, it's not as we all know, it's not a catch-all. For one person, it may require chemical intervention. For another person, it may be about retraining the brain. You know, different conditions, different challenges require different things. This idea of, chemical, not serious enough, no chemical. The person has a lacking of something in their body. They need to make it up. Another person, it's just a lifestyle that has nurtured the brain in a way. That's the beauty of neuroplasticity, is we get a better understanding of what the brain is, and therefore doctors, the medical field, are able to better diagnose far more holistically than once upon a time. Oh, that's what you're doing. Here, take these. So yeah, could be meditation, could be medication. Depends on the person, depends on the intensity, depends on their life, depends what they're willing to invest in. If a person comes before the courts and they've got serious who knows what, and it's causing them to commit crime, the court may say, not willing to wait till you get round to meditation, drug him or her. It's a situational decision. For the person who has enough awareness to say, I'm willing to discipline myself to go down this path, whatever that path is. Good? Yeah, and then we'll wind up.
No, I'm just wondering, from a Kabbalistic perspective, is it a matter of semantics, or is there a difference between a cure and a healing? A doctor might take some medicine, give you some medicine, and cure something.
From a spiritual point of view, it's semantics. It's the same thing, because from a spiritual point of view, it's about getting a person back to their equilibrium, to their balanced place. Ethics is what governs whether this is the right or the wrong way, and ethics is very much in the power of man to interpret, and therefore a school of philosophy, medical philosophy, whatever it is going to say, this is the way to go. And another school of philosophy is going to say, no, this is the way to go. And it's the egos in each camp that start making it dogmatic. Doctors are dogmatic. Practitioners of preventive medicine can be dogmatic. I've met the most open-minded doctors. I take my mother-in-law as a good example. She's a very open-minded doctor. She's a GP who's got a very, who really believes in nutrition and lifestyle choices. She's a GP. She writes scripts, like she has the power to write scripts, and yet before she'll write a script, she's like, wait, what are you eating? What are you putting in your body? And she works with people who think she's a quack. Lucky she's one of the directors of her clinic, so they can't get rid of her. But one of her colleagues thinks she's a quack. Like, we're into this quackery stuff because she's very into eating fats and not carbs. And he's like, you're mad. You're going to give people heart attacks. And she's like, you're stuck in the 80s. So who's right? I don't know. But I generally trust my mother-in-law. But that's an openness. And the greatest healers historically, according to spirituality, were the open-minded ones. And the greatest discoverers of medicine were the open-minded ones. Open-minded not necessarily to accept everyone, but the ability to suspend the ego to be open to something new and not we've reached it.
I just meant between cure and healing.
Cure is what drives the healing. So again, won't be here next week, but I think after tonight we've got enough to process. So this was the last class for this year. Not bad. Deep November. It's the latest we've ever gone. But we'll be back early next year. In the meanwhile, I think David has worked hard this year. I'd say we've easily got 30, over 50 videos. Okay, that means on average, the way Spirit Grow does a thing, 50 hours, it's probably closer to 100 hours of footage. Yeah, go and imbibe. And there's some pretty good stuff there.
Thank you.
Meditation. It's been a good year. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone here, because we started Transcendental Kabbalah as a process this year, and it was really good. I've really enjoyed it, so we're going to continue it next year of these topics in depth. Anyway, a few more surprises next year.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.